The horse refused food and water after losing its owner, until a boy did something amazing. Ethan watched the brown horse standing in the corner of the stable for the 5th time that day. The bowls of feed and water had remained untouched for 3 days, exactly as they had been left. The 10-year-old boy clutched the photograph of Mrs. Margaret tightly between his small fingers, his hands trembling slightly as he tried to understand why Thunder refused to eat anything since she had passed. The afternoon sun filtered through the wooden planks of the stable, casting golden stripes on the hay-covered floor. Ethan approached slowly, his sneakers scuffing against the concrete floor. Thunder didn't even lift his head when the boy knelt beside the empty bowls. "Thunder, you need to eat something," Ethan whispered, reaching toward the horse's muzzle. "Mrs. Margaret wouldn't want you like this." The animal remained still, his brown eyes fixed on a distant point as if waiting for someone who would never return. Ethan felt a tightness in his chest as he saw the deep sadness in Thunder's gaze. It was the same expression he had carried himself for the past few months, ever since his parents started constantly fighting about money, and he began seeking refuge at the small horse farm of their neighbor, Margaret. Ethan had met Margaret 3 months earlier, when he ran away from home after a particularly intense argument between his parents. Wandering aimlessly through the streets of the rural neighborhood of White Rock, a small town in the Kentucky countryside, Ethan had found the gate to Margaret's property slightly ajar. Curious, he peeked inside and saw the woman in her 50s brushing Thunder with gentle, loving strokes. Margaret Wilson was a retired schoolteacher who had inherited the small horse farm from her father. She had lived alone ever since her husband left her 5 years before, leaving her with enormous debts and only Thunder for company. When she found Ethan hiding behind the gate that first day, she didn't send him away. Instead, she offered him a glass of lemonade and asked if he wanted to help her care for the horse. In the months that followed, Ethan began visiting Margaret almost every day after school. She taught him how to groom Thunder, how to clean his hooves, how to prepare his feed. The boy discovered he had a special connection with the animal, able to calm him during storms and getting him to obey commands that even Margaret sometimes struggled with. The bond between Ethan and Margaret grew naturally. She became like a substitute grandmother, someone who listened to his worries about the troubles at home without judgment. Margaret told him stories about her youth, about how she met Thunder when he was just a foal, about her dreams of turning the horse farm into a special place where children could learn about horses. But 3 days ago, everything changed. Margaret had collapsed suddenly in the middle of the night and was rushed to County General Hospital. Ethan heard the news from his mother, Mrs. Jennifer, who had received a call from Margaret's sister. Desperate to see his friend, Ethan begged his mother to take him to the hospital. But when they arrived, they learned Margaret had slipped into a coma. The doctors explained she had suffered a severe stroke. The chances of recovery were slim, and even if she woke up, she would likely have permanent damage. Margaret's sister, Mrs. Barbara, who lived in Chicago, had come to town to handle the situation. She was a cold, practical woman who made it clear from the start that she had no interest in keeping the horse farm running. "This place is nothing but an expense," Barbara declared the day after the accident, while Ethan listened from behind the hospital room door. "I'll have to sell everything, the horse, the land, everything." Margaret was always too much of a dreamer, thinking she could afford this expensive hobby. Ethan felt his world collapse as he heard those words. Not only might Margaret never wake up, but Thunder would be sold to strangers. The boy knew the horse had a deep emotional bond with his owner. Ever since Margaret had been hospitalized, Thunder seemed to have lost all will to live. Now, kneeling in the stable, Ethan looked again at the photograph in his hands. It was a picture he'd found at Margaret's house, showing her smiling beside Thunder on the day they celebrated 2 years since moving to the horse farm. The horse looked happy in the photo, his ears perked and alert, a stark contrast to the deep sadness he showed now. "You miss her, don't you?" murmured Ethan, holding the picture closer to Thunder's muzzle. "I miss her too. She's the coolest person I know." To his surprise, Thunder reacted to the photo. The horse slowly lifted his head and focused his gaze on the image. His nostrils flared slightly, as if he could catch Margaret's familiar scent on the paper. Ethan's heart swelled at the reaction. It was the first time in 3 days Thunder had shown any interest in anything. The boy held the picture closer, watching the animal's movements intently. "She's at the hospital, Thunder," Ethan explained softly. "She can't come right now, but she's still here. Look, this is her. Do you remember?" Thunder stretched his neck and gently touched the photo with his nose, letting out a low, mournful sound. It was almost as if he were trying to communicate with the image of his beloved owner. Tears welled in Ethan's eyes as he witnessed the horse's display of love and longing. In that moment, he made a decision that would change everything. He wouldn't let Thunder be sold to strangers. Somehow, he'd find a way to keep the horse safe until Margaret recovered. The problem was, Ethan was only 10 years old and had no money. His parents, Robert and Jennifer, were struggling with their own financial troubles. Robert had lost his job at the furniture factory 3 months earlier and was surviving on odd jobs. Jennifer worked as a cleaner in houses downtown, but her wages barely covered the family's basic expenses. When Ethan got home that afternoon, he found his parents arguing again in the kitchen. Robert's voice was strained, his gestures sharp as he pointed to a pile of bills on the table. "Jennifer, it's impossible. We don't even have money for our own needs. How are we supposed to help with a horse?" Robert ran his hands through his graying hair, a habit he'd developed since losing his job. "But look at the state of the boy, Robert," Jennifer replied, motioning to Ethan, who had just walked in. "He hasn't eaten properly in 3 days. He's suffering too much over this." Ethan sat quietly in a chair, watching his parents argue about him as if he weren't even there. It had been like this lately. Every conversation turned into a fight about money. "Ethan," Robert said, trying to soften his tone, "Son, I know you love that horse, but there's nothing we can do. Mrs. Wilson is sick, her sister is selling everything, and we have our own problems." "But Dad, Thunder will be miserable forever if he goes somewhere else," Ethan argued, his thin voice thick with emotion. "He's not even eating. What if he gets sick too?" Jennifer walked over to her son and placed a hand on his shoulder. She was a woman in her 40s, her tired features reflecting constant worry. Her brown hair was always tied back in a simple ponytail, and her clothes showed the wear of hard labor. "My love, I know it's hard, but sometimes bad things happen and we can't do anything to change them," said Jennifer tenderly. "What matters is that you were a good friend to Mrs. Margaret and to Thunder. That will never change." Ethan shook his head vigorously, refusing to accept the situation. "No, Mom, there has to be a way. Mrs. Margaret said I had a special gift with horses. She said Thunder trusts me more than anyone else. I can't abandon him now." Robert sighed deeply and sat beside his son. "Ethan, listen to me. I admire your determination. I admire that you want to help. But keeping a horse costs a lot of money. Feed, medicine, the vet. These are expenses we simply can't afford." "What if I get the money?" asked Ethan, an idea beginning to form in his mind. "What if I find a way to pay for everything?" Robert and Jennifer exchanged worried glances. They knew their son well enough to understand that once he set his mind to something, he was incredibly persistent. "Son, you're 10 years old," said Jennifer gently. "How could you possibly earn enough to take care of a horse?" Ethan stood up from the chair, his mind buzzing with possibilities. "I can work. I can do things for people, save money, ask for help." "Ethan, no," Robert interrupted firmly. "You're not going to beg for money on the street, and you're not skipping school to work. We've talked about this before." The boy felt frustration rising in his chest. His parents didn't understand how important this was to him. Thunder wasn't just a horse. He was part of the family Ethan had found with Margaret. It was his responsibility to protect him. "So you're just going to let Thunder die of sadness?" asked Ethan, his voice beginning to tremble. "You don't care that he stopped eating just because he misses Mrs. Margaret?" "Of course we care," Jennifer replied, moving closer to her son again. "But Ethan, we have to be realistic. We can't save everyone." Ethan felt hot tears streaming down his face. The sense of helplessness was overwhelming. He was surrounded by adults who talked about being realistic and accepting the situation, but none of them seemed to understand that Thunder was more than just an animal to him. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. That night, Ethan barely slept. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling and thinking about all the conversations he'd had with Margaret about Thunder. She always said horses were deeply sensitive animals, capable of forming strong emotional bonds with their owners. When those bonds were broken, some horses could truly waste away from grief. Ethan remembered a story Margaret had told him about a famous horse that stopped eating after its owner passed away, refusing to accept food from anyone else. The animal was eventually saved by a child who patiently spent hours talking to it and showing it pictures of its former owner. The idea struck him like lightning. Ethan knew exactly what he needed to do. The next morning before school, Ethan stopped by the horse farm to check on Thunder. The horse was in the same position as the day before, completely ignoring the fresh feed someone had left in the trough. It was probably Margaret's sister, who came once a day to care for the animal while deciding what to do with the property. Ethan approached carefully and showed Thunder the photograph again. The horse reacted just as before, gently touching the image with his muzzle. It was clear the photo stirred some emotional memory in the animal. "Thunder, I'll bring more photos of Mrs. Margaret," Ethan promised quietly. "And I'll find a way to keep you safe until she comes back. I promise." On the way to school, Ethan came up with a plan. He would need help, and he knew exactly who might assist him. His teacher, Mrs. Sarah, had always been understanding of her students' troubles. Maybe she could guide him on how to get help for Thunder. Mrs. Sarah was a woman in her early 30s, with short blonde hair and colorful glasses. She had been teaching the 4th grade class for 5 years and had a reputation as the most beloved teacher in the school. She always made time to talk to her students about their personal worries, offering practical advice and emotional support. Ethan waited until recess to approach her. He found her in the teacher's lounge, grading papers while drinking coffee. "Mrs. Sarah, can I talk to you?" Ethan asked timidly. "Of course, Ethan. What is it?" Sarah set her pen aside and gave the boy her full attention. Ethan told her the whole story about Margaret, Thunder, and the desperate situation they were in. Sarah listened carefully, asking occasional questions to better understand the details. "Ethan, I really admire your concern for the horse and Mrs. Margaret," Sarah said when he finished. "But you need to understand this is a very complicated situation for a child to handle alone." "I know, Mrs. Sarah. That's why I'm asking for help," Ethan insisted. "Do you know anyone who could help? Or somewhere I could get money to take care of Thunder?" Sarah sighed, recognizing the genuine determination in the boy's eyes. "Ethan, it's not that simple. Keeping a horse is a huge and expensive responsibility. It's not something that can be fixed with just good intentions." "But Thunder will waste away if he's sold to strangers," Ethan argued, his voice urgent. "He hasn't eaten in 4 days. What if he gets really sick?" Sarah fell silent for a moment, clearly thinking it over. Ethan took the opportunity to pull out the photo of Margaret he always carried in his pocket. "Look, Mrs. Sarah, this is Mrs. Margaret with Thunder. They love each other so much. When I show him this picture, it's the only time Thunder shows any emotion." Sarah studied the photo closely. It was impossible not to be moved by the genuine happiness on Margaret's face and the affectionate bond between her and the horse. "Ethan, let me ask you something," Sarah said, handing the photo back. "Have you talked to Mrs. Margaret's sister about your concerns for Thunder?" Ethan shook his head. "She doesn't like me. She thinks kids shouldn't meddle in grown-up business." "Well, technically she's not wrong," Sarah considered. "But maybe if you explained to her about Thunder's behavior, how he's refusing to eat—" "I already tried," Ethan interrupted. "She said horses are tough and he'll eat when he's really hungry. But I know that's not true. Thunder is suffering." Sarah realized Ethan had a real understanding of the animal's behavior. It was clear Margaret had taught him a lot during the months they'd spent together. "Ethan, I'll help you, but in a responsible way," Sarah finally decided. "I'll talk to the school principal to see if we can organize some kind of educational project about animal welfare. Maybe we can raise awareness in the community about Thunder's situation." Ethan's eyes lit up with hope. "You'd really do that?" "I'll try," Sarah promised. "But you need to understand I can't guarantee results. And no matter what happens, you can't skip school or neglect your studies because of this." Ethan agreed enthusiastically, feeling like he finally had an adult on his side. For the rest of the school day, he could barely concentrate on his classes. thinking about all the possibilities that might open up with Mrs. Sarah's help. When he got home that afternoon, Ethan found an even tenser situation than usual. His parents were in the kitchen with a woman he didn't know. She was elegant, with neatly styled grey hair and expensive clothes that contrasted sharply with the family's simple home. "Ethan, come here," Robert called, his voice formal and a little nervous. "This is Mrs. Barbara, Mrs. Margaret's sister." Ethan felt a chill in his stomach when he recognized the name. This was the woman who wanted to sell Thunder. She looked him up and down with critical eyes, clearly unimpressed by what she saw. "So you're the boy who was bothering my sister," Barbara said accusingly. "Your parents told me you've been making a fuss about the horse." "I wasn't bothering Mrs. Margaret," Ethan defended himself, feeling anger rise in his chest. "She liked my company, and Thunder isn't eating because he misses her." "Nonsense," Barbara replied dismissively. "Horses don't have complex feelings like humans. He'll eat when he's hungry enough." Ethan opened his mouth to argue, but Robert cut him off with a stern look. "Ethan, Mrs. Barbara came here to clear things up. She's selling the horse to a good family where he'll be well taken care of." "I've already found an interested buyer," Barbara announced with satisfaction. "A gentleman from Chicago who collects purebred horses. He's coming to pick up the animal next week." Ethan felt the world spin around him. 1 week. He only had 1 week to find a solution. "Please, Mrs. Barbara," Ethan begged, his voice breaking. "Thunder is suffering. He hasn't eaten in 4 days. If you sell him now, he might waste away from sadness." "Boy, you watch too many movies," Barbara replied impatiently. "The new owner is experienced with horses. He'll know how to handle any difficult behavior." "But Thunder isn't difficult," Ethan protested. "He just misses Mrs. Margaret. Look, I have a picture that shows how happy he was with her." Ethan pulled the photograph from his pocket and handed it to Barbara. She glanced at it briefly and returned it with indifference. "My dear, sentimentality doesn't pay the bills," Barbara said coldly. "My sister spent a fortune keeping that animal, and now that she's hospitalized with no sign of recovery, someone has to make practical decisions." "What if I can cover Thunder's expenses?" Ethan asked desperately. "If I get the money for feed, the vet, everything," Barbara laughed mockingly. "You? A child? Ethan, keeping a horse costs at least $2,000 a month. You have no idea what you're talking about." Ethan felt tears threatening to spill, but he forced himself to stay composed in front of the unpleasant woman. $2,000 a month, Ethan repeated, memorizing the number. "If I get that money, would you let Thunder stay?" "Ethan, stop this fantasy," Jennifer interjected, clearly embarrassed by the situation. "We can't possibly come up with that kind of money." "Exactly," Barbara agreed. "And even if you could, who would guarantee the daily care of the animal? My sister won't recover anytime soon, if she recovers at all." "I would take care of him," Ethan declared firmly. "I know how to do everything. Mrs. Margaret taught me." "You're 10 years old," Barbara reminded him irritably. "You can't take legal responsibility for a large animal." The discussion was interrupted by the arrival of a man Ethan didn't know. He was a middle-aged gentleman, wearing dirty work clothes and heavy boots. Robert greeted him familiarly. "Everyone, this is Mr. Richard, who came to check on the horse's condition," Robert explained. Richard was the town veterinarian, known for treating both pets and livestock on the local farms. He had a reputation for being honest and competent, though sometimes a bit blunt in his assessments. "Mrs. Barbara called me, worried about the animal's state," Richard explained. "She said he hasn't been eating for a few days." "Exactly," Barbara confirmed. "I want you to examine the horse and tell me if there's any health issue that might affect the sale." Ethan saw an opportunity in the vet's presence. If a professional confirmed Thunder was emotionally distressed, maybe Barbara would have to reconsider the rushed sale. "Dr. Richard," Ethan called, trying to get the vet's attention. "Thunder isn't sick in his body. He's sad because he misses Mrs. Margaret." Richard looked at the boy with interest. "What do you know about horses, kid?" "Mrs. Margaret taught me a lot," Ethan replied, encouraged by the question. "She said horses can get depressed when they lose their owners, especially if they had a strong bond." Richard murmured, clearly considering Ethan's words. "That's not impossible. Horses are social animals and can form deep emotional connections." "Come on, doctor," Barbara interrupted impatiently. Do you really believe an animal would stop eating over sentimentality? Yes, I do, Richard replied curtly. I've seen cases where horses developed eating problems after traumatic changes in their environment or routine. Ethan felt a surge of hope. Finally, an adult was validating his observations about Thunder's behavior. Then let's go to the horse farm and examine the animal, Richard decided. I need to see the situation firsthand to give a proper diagnosis. The group headed to Margaret's property, located just 3 blocks from Ethan's house. Along the way, the boy took the chance to talk more with the vet. Dr. Richard, Thunder reacts when I show him pictures of Mrs. Margaret, Ethan explained. It's the only thing that sparks any interest in him. Interesting, Richard remarked. Horses have very good visual memory. It's possible he's associating the image with memories of his owner. When they arrived at the horse farm, they found Thunder exactly where Ethan had left him that morning. The horse stood in the corner of the stable, head lowered, with untouched food and water bowls beside him. Richard approached the animal slowly, carefully observing his behavior. Thunder didn't even lift his head when the vet came near. When was the last time anyone saw this horse eat or drink? Richard asked. 4 days ago, Ethan answered promptly, since Mrs. Margaret was hospitalized. Richard examined the food and water bowls, noting they were completely full. Then he observed Thunder's breathing and the condition of his coat. Ethan, you said the horse reacts to pictures of Mrs. Margaret, Richard asked. Yes, sir, Ethan confirmed, pulling the photograph from his pocket. Look. Ethan held the picture close to Thunder's nose, and immediately the horse raised his head and fixed his gaze on the image. His nostrils flared and he stretched his neck to gently touch the photo. Richard watched the reaction with professional attention, clearly impressed. That's truly remarkable, the vet murmured. The animal is showing clear recognition of the image. But that doesn't mean anything, protested Barbara. Horses recognize smells, colors, shapes. It doesn't mean he's suffering like a human being. Actually, Mrs. Barbara, Richard replied firmly, the behavior I'm observing is consistent with equine depression. It's a real medical condition that can have serious consequences if not treated properly. Ethan felt his heart race. The vet was confirming everything he had tried to explain to the adults. Doctor, what happens if Thunder keeps refusing to eat? Ethan asked. An adult horse can survive without food for about 3 to 5 days under normal conditions, Richard explained. After that, serious metabolic problems begin. If he really hasn't eaten anything solid in 4 days, we're entering dangerous territory. So he needs treatment? Ethan pressed. Yes, Richard confirmed. He needs immediate veterinary intervention and most likely a familiar environment to help him overcome the trauma of separation. Barbara seemed irritated by the diagnosis. Doctor, I need to sell this horse next week. The buyer is already confirmed. I can't cancel over a temporary behavioral issue. Mrs. Barbara, Richard said seriously, if this animal is moved to a completely new environment in this emotional state, his depression could worsen. There's a real risk he might refuse to eat indefinitely. And what do you suggest? Barbara asked impatiently. Richard looked at Ethan, who was watching the conversation with intense focus. Ideally, the horse should stay in a familiar environment with people he knows and trusts until he recovers emotionally, Richard answered. After that, a gradual transfer might be possible. Ethan felt a surge of hope. The vet was practically recommending that Thunder stay with people he knew. Dr. Richard, Ethan said quickly, I could take care of Thunder. I know how to do everything and he trusts me. Ethan, you're a child, Richard reminded him gently. Caring for a sick horse requires constant adult supervision. My parents could supervise, Ethan suggested, looking hopefully at Robert and Jennifer. Robert and Jennifer exchanged uneasy glances. It was obvious they didn't want to take on such a big responsibility. Ethan, we've already talked about this, Robert said firmly. We don't have the financial means to keep a horse. Would treatment be expensive? Ethan asked Richard. Not necessarily, the vet replied. The main thing is providing a stable, familiar environment. Medication might help, but emotional support is essential. Ethan saw an opening in the vet's response. So it wouldn't be too expensive, just regular feed and maybe some medicine. Ethan, It's not just that, Jennifer interjected. There's also the responsibility, the time, the space. I'd take care of everything, Ethan promised. I'd come here every day before and after school. I'd do whatever was needed. Barbara was growing visibly impatient with the whole discussion. Look, this is getting off track, she declared authoritatively. I'm the only one with legal authority to decide this animal's fate. My sister is in a coma. I'm responsible for her affairs now. Mrs. Barbara, Richard intervened, as a vet, I'm obligated to inform you of the risks of moving this animal in his current state. If something happens to him during or after the sale, it could bring legal trouble for you. The mention of legal trouble seemed to catch Barbara's attention for the first time. What kind of legal trouble? If the buyer discovers that the animal had serious behavioral issues at the time of sale, and this wasn't properly disclosed, they can request cancellation of the transaction or compensation, explained Richard. Additionally, if the horse's condition worsens and requires intensive veterinary treatment, the costs could be charged to the seller. Ethan watched Barbara process this information. It was clear she hadn't considered these possibilities. Doctor, how long would it take for this behavioral issue to resolve? Asked Barbara. Hard to say for sure, replied Richard. It could be a matter of weeks or months, depending on the environment and care he receives. Months? Exclaimed Barbara. I can't wait months to sell this animal. Mrs. Barbara, said Ethan, seeing an opportunity, what if it worked like this? I take care of Thunder until he gets better, and then you can sell him. That way there's no legal risk, and Thunder will be fine. Ethan, you're 10 years old, Barbara repeated, exasperated. How would you care for a sick horse? With my parents' help and Dr. Richard's, Ethan answered hopefully. And I already know a lot. Mrs. Margaret taught me. Richard looked thoughtfully at the boy. Ethan really does show knowledge about horses, the vet remarked, and the animal clearly trusts him. With proper supervision, it could work. Robert and Jennifer seemed increasingly uncomfortable with where the conversation was heading. Everyone, we need to be realistic, said Robert. Even if the cost isn't high, we can't take on this responsibility. What if something goes wrong? What if the boy gets hurt? Dad, I promise I'll be careful, pleaded Ethan, and Dr. Richard can teach me anything I don't know yet. Ethan, it's not just about being careful, explained Jennifer. It's about time, energy, and worry. We already have enough problems to deal with. Ethan felt frustration rising again. All the adults seemed to find excuses not to help Thunder. But he'll waste away if he's sold now, Ethan argued, his voice beginning to shake. Dr. Richard himself said it's dangerous to move him in this state. Ethan, maybe it's best to leave this in the hands of more experienced people, Richard suggested gently. The new owner should have the resources to handle the situation. No, Doctor, protested Ethan. The new owner doesn't know Thunder. They don't know he likes carrots cut into small pieces, that he's afraid of Thunder, that he loves when you brush his neck slowly. Thunder needs someone who knows him. Richard was impressed by the depth of Ethan's understanding of the horse's specific behaviors. Ethan, you really do know this animal well, Richard admitted, but caring for a depressed horse requires more than knowing his preferences. You need experience to spot warning signs, to know when to call for professional help. Then teach me, begged Ethan. I learn fast. You can teach me everything I need to know. Richard glanced at Ethan's parents, searching for some sign of support, but found only worry and reluctance. The discussion was interrupted by the arrival of Mrs. Sarah, Ethan's teacher. She had promised to try to help and had apparently come to assess the situation in person. Good afternoon, Sarah greeted politely. I'm Ethan's teacher. He told me about the horse's situation, and I came to see if I could help in any way. Ethan was moved to see that Mrs. Sarah had kept her promise to try to help. Mrs. Sarah, he exclaimed, Dr. Richard said Thunder is depressed and that it's dangerous to sell him now. Sarah looked at the vet for confirmation. It's true, Doctor, confirmed Richard. The animal is showing clear signs of behavioral depression. Transferring him in this state could worsen his condition. And what would be the recommended solution? Asked Sarah. Ideally, keeping the horse in a familiar environment until he recovers emotionally, replied Richard. Ethan has an obvious connection with the animal, but he's too young to take on this responsibility alone. Sarah looked thoughtfully at Ethan, then at Thunder, who was still showing interest in Margaret's photograph. "Ethan told me the horse reacts to pictures of Mrs. Wilson," Sarah commented. "May I see?" Ethan showed the photograph to Sarah, who carefully observed Thunder's reaction. The horse immediately perked up his ears and touched the image with his muzzle. "This is extraordinary," murmured Sarah, clearly impressed. "He really recognizes the image." "That's why I can't let them sell Thunder now," Ethan explained. "He still hopes Mrs. Wilson will come back. If they take him away, he'll lose all hope." Sarah fell silent for a moment, watching the interaction between Ethan and the horse. It was clear there was a special bond between them. "Ethan," Sarah finally said, "I spoke with the school principal about the possibility of starting an educational project related to animal welfare. She was interested in the idea." Ethan's eyes lit up. "What kind of project, Mrs. Sarah?" "Well, we could organize educational visits for students here at the horse farm, where they'd learn about horse care," Sarah explained. "That could generate some income to help with Thunder's expenses." Barbara seemed interested for the first time in the conversation. "Paid visits? How much money would that bring in?" "It depends," Sarah replied cautiously. "We'd have to talk to other schools in the area, see how many groups would be interested. But it could be a temporary source of income." Ethan was thrilled by the possibility. "Mrs. Sarah, I could help with the visits. I can teach the kids about horses, show them how to take care of Thunder." "Ethan, slow down," Robert interjected. "This is just an idea. We don't know if it'll work." "But at least it's a chance," Ethan argued. "And while we set it up, Thunder can stay here, in the place he knows." Barbara seemed to be seriously considering the proposal. "How long would it take to organize these visits?" she asked Sarah. "A few weeks, maybe a month," Sarah replied. "I'd need to talk to other schools, prepare educational materials, get permissions." "A month," Barbara repeated, clearly calculating. "And what's the guarantee this would work?" "There are no guarantees," Sarah admitted honestly. "But Ethan has real knowledge about horses, and there's growing interest in outdoor educational activities for children." Richard decided to weigh in. "From a veterinary standpoint," he said, "a month would be enough time to assess whether the horse is responding to behavioral treatment. If he starts eating normally and shows improvement in mood, transferring him later would be much safer." Ethan realized there was finally a real chance to save Thunder. All the adults seemed to be seriously considering the idea. "Mrs. Barbara," Ethan said respectfully, "if I can get Thunder to eat again and if Mrs. Sarah's project shows promise, would you give us more time before selling him?" Barbara was silent for a few moments, clearly weighing the pros and cons. "Ethan," she finally said, "if you can get this horse to eat normally within a week, and if this educational project shows real potential for income, I can delay the sale for a month." Ethan felt his heart burst with joy. "Do you promise?" "I promise," Barbara confirmed, "but with conditions. If in a week the horse isn't eating normally, or if in a month the project isn't generating enough income to cover basic expenses, I'll sell him immediately." "How much income would be needed?" asked Sarah. "Dr. Richard said keeping a horse costs about $2,000 a month," Ethan reminded them. "Not necessarily," Richard corrected. "Those $2,000 include expenses like the vet, farrier, and preventive medications. For a healthy horse with basic care, about $1,000 a month would cover feed, water, and stall cleaning." Ethan did quick calculations in his head. $1,000 a month, that's about $33 a day, he said aloud. If a group of 10 kids pays $5 each, we'd already have $150 a week. "Ethan, you're good at math," Sarah remarked, impressed. "But getting regular groups isn't that simple." "But is it possible?" Ethan insisted. "It's possible," Sarah confirmed, "especially if we create a well-structured, interesting educational program." Robert and Jennifer still seemed hesitant about the whole situation. "And who would be legally responsible for the horse during this time?" Robert asked. "I'd still be the legal owner," Barbara replied, "but Ethan could be the direct caretaker under adult supervision." "Dad, Mom, please," Ethan begged. "It's just 1 month. If it doesn't work out, Thunder will be sold anyway, but at least we tried to help him." Jennifer looked at her son, seeing the determination and genuine love in his eyes. "Ethan, are you sure you can handle this responsibility?" she asked softly. "I am, Mom. Mrs. Margaret taught me a lot, and Dr. Richard can teach me the rest," Ethan replied with conviction. Robert sighed deeply. "And if something goes wrong? If the horse gets hurt while you're caring for him?" "That's why I'm here," Richard interjected. "I can make regular visits to monitor the animal's health and guide Ethan through any issues that come up." "You'd do that?" Ethan asked hopefully. "I can come twice a week for the first month," Richard offered, "at no cost, considering it's a special situation." Ethan could hardly believe so many people were stepping up to help. "So it's decided?" he asked, looking at each adult present. "Well," Barbara said slowly, "it seems we have a plan. Ethan has a week to get the horse eating again and a month to prove the educational project can work. And I'll help organize the school visits," Sarah promised. "And I'll monitor Thunder's health," Richard confirmed. Ethan looked at his parents, who still seemed reluctant but were clearly being swayed by the others' generosity. "Dad? Mom?" Ethan asked quietly. Robert glanced at Jennifer, and she nodded almost imperceptibly. "All right, Ethan," Robert finally said. "You can try. But if anything goes wrong, if you can't handle the responsibility, we stop immediately." Ethan shouted with joy and ran to hug his parents, then Mrs. Sarah, and finally approached Thunder. "Did you hear that, Thunder?" Ethan said excitedly to the horse. "We get to stay together. I'll take care of you until Mrs. Margaret gets better." Thunder lifted his head and looked at Ethan with what seemed like a flicker of interest. It was the first time in days the horse had shown any positive reaction to anything other than Margaret's photos. "Ethan," Richard called, "now that we have an agreement, I need to teach you some important things about caring for a depressed horse." Ethan paid full attention as Richard explained the warning signs he should watch for, how to prepare more appealing meals for the horse, and when to call for professional help. "The first thing you need to do is try to get him to drink water," instructed Richard. "Dehydration is more dangerous than hunger in the short term." "How do I get him to drink?" asked Ethan. "Horses like fresh, clean water. Change the water in the bowls twice a day, and try offering warm water with a little salt," suggested Richard. "Sometimes that stimulates their appetite." Ethan carefully memorized each instruction. He felt like he finally had a real and important mission. "Dr. Richard," Ethan asked, "do you think if I show Thunder pictures of Mrs. Margaret every day, it might help him feel less sad?" "It's possible," Richard replied thoughtfully. "Maintaining connections to positive memories can be beneficial for emotional recovery." "I have more pictures of Mrs. Margaret at home," Ethan remembered. "I'll bring them all to show him." Sarah glanced at the clock and realized it was getting late. "Ethan, I need to go now, but tomorrow I'll start reaching out to other schools about the educational project," she promised. "Mrs. Sarah, thank you so much for helping me," Ethan said sincerely. "You've shown a lot of courage and determination, Ethan," Sarah replied. "I hope everything works out." After Sarah said goodbye, Richard also prepared to leave. "Ethan, I'll come back the day after tomorrow to see how Thunder is responding," the vet said. "If you have any concerns before then, call me right away." "Don't worry, Dr. Richard," Ethan promised. Barbara was the last to leave, but before she did, she looked at Ethan seriously. "Son, you have 1 week to prove you can make a difference," she said firmly. "Don't disappoint me." "I won't disappoint you, Mrs. Barbara," Ethan promised with all the sincerity he could muster. After all the adults had left, Ethan stayed alone with Thunder in the stable. The sun was setting, casting a golden light that filtered through the wooden planks. Ethan knelt beside the food and water bowls, determined to start his work as Thunder's official caretaker right away. "Thunder, it's just you and me now," Ethan said softly. "We'll get through this together." The horse looked at Ethan with his melancholy brown eyes, and for the first time in days, Ethan thought he saw a flicker of hope in that gaze. That night, Ethan could barely sleep from anxiety and excitement. He had gotten a chance to save Thunder, but he knew the real work was just beginning. 1 week to get the horse eating again, and 1 month to prove the educational project could work. At 5 in the morning, Ethan woke up naturally and jumped out of bed. He wanted to get to the horse farm before school to start working with Thunder right away. He found his parents in the kitchen, quietly eating breakfast. Their expressions still showed concern about the whole situation. "Good morning, Dad." "Good morning, Mom," Ethan greeted cheerfully. "Good morning, son," Robert replied. "Sleep well?" "Yes, I'm excited to start taking care of Thunder," Ethan said, quickly grabbing a piece of bread and a glass of milk. "Ethan, eat properly," Jennifer urged. "And remember, you can't be late for school because of the horse." "I won't be late, Mom. I promise," Ethan assured her, finishing his breakfast quickly. Ethan ran out of the house toward the horse farm, carrying in his backpack all the pictures of Margaret he had found in her room. During the commotion of the previous day, he had asked Barbara for permission to collect some personal mementos of Margaret, and she had allowed it, as long as they were only photos and small items. When he arrived at the stable, he found Thunder in the same position as the day before. The bowls of food and water remained untouched, but Ethan noticed the water level had dropped slightly. Perhaps the horse had taken a few sips during the night. "Good morning, Thunder," Ethan said softly, approaching slowly. "I brought more photos of Miss Margaret for you to see." Ethan pulled a small photo album from his backpack, one he had found in Margaret's house. It contained snapshots of different moments in her life with Thunder, from when the horse was just a colt to more recent pictures. "Look at this one," Ethan said, showing a photo where Margaret was feeding Thunder a carrot. "Remember when Miss Margaret used to give you carrots like this?" Thunder lifted his head and focused his gaze on the photograph. His nostrils flared, and he stretched his neck to sniff the image. Encouraged by the reaction, Ethan continued showing more photos, narrating the scenes he recognized. "And this one is when you two won that blue ribbon at the county fair," Ethan said, pointing to a photo where Margaret stood proudly beside Thunder, who wore a blue ribbon around his neck. "Miss Margaret told me you trained for months for that competition." To his surprise, Thunder let out a soft sound, a kind of gentle whinny Ethan had never heard before. It was almost as if the horse was trying to communicate. "You remember, don't you?" Ethan asked, moved. "You remember all the good times you had with Miss Margaret?" Ethan kept showing photos for a few more minutes, carefully watching Thunder's reactions. The horse seemed genuinely interested, flicking his ears and gently touching some pictures with his muzzle. After going through several photos, Ethan decided to try the vet's suggestion about offering warm salt water. "Thunder, Dr. Richard said you might like warm water," Ethan explained, walking to the faucet outside the stable. He filled a bucket with warm water, added a pinch of salt, and stirred it well. Then he carried the bucket inside and placed it near Thunder. "Try drinking a little," Ethan encouraged. "It'll do you good." Thunder sniffed the new water but didn't drink right away. Ethan decided to be patient, remembering Margaret's advice about never forcing a horse to do something it didn't want. While he waited, Ethan took the opportunity to clean the stable, removing soiled hay and spreading fresh bedding in the corners. Margaret had taught him that horses liked clean, tidy spaces, and Ethan wanted Thunder to feel as comfortable as possible. As he worked, Ethan kept talking to Thunder about Margaret, sharing stories she had told him during their visits. "Miss Margaret told me that when you were little, you were afraid of the rain," Ethan said, while sweeping the floor. "But she would stay by your side during storms until you calmed down. She said taking care of you was like raising a child." Ethan stopped sweeping when he noticed Thunder had moved closer to the bucket of warm water. The horse sniffed the liquid again and slowly lowered his head to drink. "Thunder," Ethan whispered excitedly, careful not to startle him. "You're drinking." Thunder only took a few sips before stopping, but to Ethan, it was a huge victory. It was the first time in 4 days the horse had willingly consumed anything. Ethan checked his watch and realized he needed to hurry so he wouldn't be late for school. But before leaving, he wanted to try one more thing. He remembered that Margaret always hummed to Thunder while brushing him. It was a simple song she said she had learned as a child, about a horse traveling through green fields. Ethan began to hum the same melody he had heard Margaret sing so many times. His voice was thin and slightly off-key, but he tried hard to recall the lyrics. Little horse, run free through the field. Little horse, never lose hope." Thunder reacted immediately to the familiar tune. He pricked up his ears and turned his head completely toward Ethan, as if he were truly listening. Ethan kept singing for a few more minutes, watching how the music seemed to calm and engage Thunder. It was clear the horse associated that song with happy moments by Margaret's side. "Tomorrow I'll come back to sing more for you," Ethan promised, tucking the photos into his backpack. "And I'll bring carrots just like Miss Margaret used to do." Ethan ran off to school, but his heart was full of hope. Thunder had drunk water and responded to the music. They were small but meaningful signs that the horse was starting to react to care and attention. At school, Ethan could barely focus on his lessons. His mind kept wandering back to Thunder and all the plans he was making to help him recover. During recess, he looked for Miss Sarah to tell her about the morning's progress. "Miss Sarah," Ethan called, approaching the teacher supervising the playground. "Hello, Ethan. How was your first morning taking care of Thunder?" Sarah asked with interest. "He drank water," Ethan announced proudly, "and he reacted when I showed him pictures of Miss Margaret and sang the song she always sang to him." "That's wonderful, Ethan," Sarah said, smiling. "It seems you really have a special gift with horses." "Miss Sarah, have you managed to talk to other schools about the project yet?" Ethan asked eagerly. "Not yet, Ethan. Yesterday was our first conversation about it, remember?" Sarah gently reminded him. "These things take time to organize." Ethan felt a little disappointed, but tried to stay optimistic. "How long do you think it will take?" "Well, I need to prepare a written proposal, contact principals from other schools, explain the project." Sarah paused to think. "Maybe 2 weeks to get the first responses." Ethan quickly did the math. 2 weeks was half the time Barbara had given him to prove the project could work. "Miss Sarah, isn't there any way to speed it up?" Ethan asked worriedly. "Ethan, I understand your urgency, but educational projects require careful planning," Sarah explained. "We can't just improvise something and hope it works." Ethan saw her point, but the time pressure was starting to weigh on him. "What if I help you prepare the proposal?" Ethan suggested. "I know a lot about horses from what Miss Margaret taught me." "That's a good idea," Sarah agreed. "You could write a summary of everything you know about horse care, and I'll incorporate it into the educational proposal." Ethan got excited at the possibility of actively contributing to the project. "I can do that today," Ethan promised. "No need to rush, Ethan," Sarah said, "but if you can prepare something over the weekend, it would be very helpful." The rest of the school day passed quickly, and Ethan hurried back to the horse farm as soon as classes ended. He was eager to see if Thunder had made more progress in his absence. When he reached the stable, Ethan was disappointed to see the food bowls still untouched. But the lukewarm water he had prepared that morning was significantly lower, indicating that Thunder had continued drinking throughout the day. "Hi, Thunder," Ethan greeted. "I brought carrots for you just like I promised." Ethan pulled several carrots from his backpack that he had asked his mother to buy at the market. He remembered Margaret saying Thunder liked carrots cut into small pieces, so Ethan had also brought a small knife. Sitting on the ground beside Thunder, Ethan began cutting the carrots into small pieces, talking to the horse as he worked. "Mrs. Margaret told me you were really smart at learning new tricks," Ethan said while cutting. "She taught me how to get you to shake hands when asked." Ethan finished cutting the carrots and offered a piece in his palm to Thunder. The horse sniffed the familiar food, but didn't eat right away. "I know you miss her," Ethan said softly. "I do too. But Mrs. Margaret wouldn't want you to stop eating. She'd be sad if she knew you were hurting yourself because of her." Ethan picked up one of the photos of Margaret and held it alongside the carrot pieces. "Look, what's Mrs. Margaret doing in this picture?" he asked, showing an image where Margaret was offering a carrot to Thunder. "She's giving you a carrot because she loves you and wants you to be strong and healthy." Thunder looked at the photograph and then at the carrot in Ethan's hand. Slowly, he stretched his neck and gently took a piece of carrot with his lips. Ethan could barely contain his emotion as he watched Thunder chew his first solid food in 4 days. "Good boy, Thunder," Ethan praised quietly. "Mrs. Margaret would be so proud of you." Encouraged by the success, Ethan offered more carrot pieces, always accompanied by photos of Margaret and kind words. Thunder ate about half the carrots Ethan had brought, which was a significant improvement. "Tomorrow I'll bring more carrots and see if you'll try some feed too," Ethan planned aloud. Ethan spent the rest of the afternoon cleaning and organizing the stable, humming the song Margaret used to sing. Thunder seemed more alert and interested in his surroundings, though he still showed obvious signs of sadness. As the sun began to set, Ethan said goodbye to Thunder, promising to return the next morning. "Bye, Thunder. Tomorrow we'll keep working to help you feel better," Ethan said, giving the horse a gentle pat on the neck. At home, Ethan found his parents having dinner in the kitchen. He enthusiastically shared the day's progress, explaining how Thunder had drunk water and eaten carrots. "That's wonderful, son," Jennifer said, genuinely happy for Ethan's achievements. "It sounds like you really know how to take care of him." "Yeah, Ethan," Robert agreed. "You're doing a great job. But remember, it's only been 2 days. There's a whole week ahead." Ethan understood his father was trying to keep his expectations realistic, but he felt confident about the progress he was making with Thunder. "Dad, tomorrow I'll try to get him to eat some feed too," Ethan planned. "And over the weekend, I'll help Mrs. Sarah prepare the proposal for the other schools." "Ethan, just don't forget you have other responsibilities too," Jennifer reminded. "Homework, helping around the house, studying for tests." "I won't forget, Mom," Ethan promised. "But taking care of Thunder is really important to me." Robert and Jennifer exchanged glances, clearly concerned about how emotionally invested Ethan was in the situation. "Son," Robert said carefully, "we just want to make sure you're prepared for any outcome. If in the end it doesn't work out—" "It's going to work out, Dad," Ethan interrupted with conviction. "Thunder is getting better, and I'll be able to help him." That night, Ethan spent extra time doing his homework and studying for a math test he had on Friday. He wanted to make sure his parents had no reason to complain that taking care of Thunder was affecting his studies. After finishing his schoolwork, Ethan began working on the proposal he had promised to prepare for Mrs. Sarah. He grabbed a notebook and started writing down everything he knew about horses, organizing the information in a way that could be useful for an educational project. "Important Things About Horses That Kids Should Know," Ethan wrote as the title. Then he began listing everything Margaret had taught him. 1. Horses are very intelligent and sensitive animals. They can learn tricks and recognize people. 2. Horses like clean and tidy environments. It's important to change their water every day and keep the stable clean. 3. Horses mainly eat hay and feed, but they also enjoy carrots, apples, and other vegetables as treats. 4. Horses can feel sad when they lose people they love, just like humans. 5. To take good care of a horse, you need to brush them every day, clean their hooves, and check if they're healthy. Ethan kept writing for over an hour, remembering all the lessons Margaret had shared with him. The more he wrote, the more he realized how much he had learned during his months with her and Thunder. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps a lot for those of us just starting out. Now, continuing. The next morning, Ethan woke up even earlier, determined to keep making progress with Thunder. He prepared warm salt water and picked out the best photos of Margaret to show the horse. When he arrived at the horse farm, he was surprised to find Thunder standing near the water bowls, instead of staying in the corner like the previous days. It was a subtle but meaningful sign that the horse was becoming more active. "Good morning, Thunder," Ethan greeted him cheerfully. "You seem livelier today." Ethan changed the water in the bowls and offered warm water again. Thunder drank more readily than the day before, which encouraged Ethan to try the next step. "Today we'll try some feed mixed with carrots," Ethan announced, grabbing a handful of feed and mixing it with small carrot pieces. He offered the mix in the palm of his hand, along with a photo of Margaret eating an apple next to Thunder. "Look how happy Mrs. Margaret is in this picture," Ethan commented. "She wants you to be strong and healthy for when she comes back from the hospital." To his delight, Thunder ate not just the carrot, but also some of the feed. It was the first time in 5 days that the horse had eaten his regular food. Ethan spent the next 30 minutes offering small portions of food, always accompanied by photos and stories about Margaret. Gradually, Thunder accepted more food, though still in much smaller amounts than usual. "Good job, Thunder," Ethan praised when the horse finished eating about a quarter of his recommended daily feed. "Tomorrow we'll try a little more." Before heading to school, Ethan carefully brushed Thunder, remembering all the techniques Margaret had taught him. The horse seemed to enjoy the attention, visibly relaxing during the brushing. "You're looking handsome," Ethan remarked as he brushed. "Mrs. Margaret always said you were the most beautiful horse in the area." At school, Ethan looked for Mrs. Sarah during recess to give her the proposal he had prepared the night before. "Mrs. Sarah, I wrote down everything I know about horses," said Ethan, handing the notebook to the teacher. Sarah flipped through the notebook, impressed by the amount and quality of the information Ethan had compiled. "Ethan, this is excellent," praised Sarah. "You really learned a lot from Mrs. Margaret. This information will be very useful for preparing the educational project." "Do you think you can speed up the process?" Ethan asked hopefully. "Well, with such detailed information, I can start reaching out to other schools as early as today," Sarah promised. "I'll try to schedule at least 2 meetings for next week." Ethan grew excited at the prospect of faster progress. "Mrs. Sarah, when you have the meetings, can I come along to explain about the horses?" he suggested. "That might be a good idea," Sarah agreed. "The principals would be impressed to see a child so knowledgeable about the subject." The rest of the school day passed quickly, and Ethan hurried back to the horse farm at lunchtime. He wanted to check if Thunder had maintained his progress during his absence. When he arrived, he was moved to discover that Thunder had drunk more water and even eaten some of the feed left over from the morning. "Thunder!" Ethan exclaimed. "You ate on your own, that's wonderful!" Ethan offered more food and watched as Thunder ate more naturally than in previous days. The horse still looked visibly sad, but seemed to be gradually regaining interest in life. That afternoon, Ethan decided to try something new. He remembered Margaret mentioning that Thunder enjoyed short walks around the property when he was feeling well. "How about we take a little walk outside?" Ethan suggested, picking up the lead rope Margaret used to guide Thunder. Ethan carefully fastened the rope to Thunder's halter and slowly led him out of the stable. It was the first time in days the horse had stepped outside his stall. The afternoon sun and fresh air seemed to have a positive effect on Thunder. He held his head higher and showed interest in his surroundings, sniffing flowers and watching birds. "Mrs. Margaret told me you two used to walk around here every day," Ethan said as they slowly made their way across the grounds. "She said you know every corner of this property." During the walk, Ethan continued showing photos and telling stories about Margaret. Thunder seemed genuinely more alert and engaged, as if the happy memories were helping him reconnect with joy. After about 20 minutes, Ethan led Thunder back to the stable. The horse seemed a little livelier, and Ethan was starting to feel real hope that he could help him recover completely. That afternoon, as Ethan tidied the stable, he heard the sound of a car approaching. Looking out, he saw it was Dr. Richard, who had promised to return to check on Thunder's progress. "Hi, Dr. Richard," Ethan greeted him eagerly. "Thunder is doing much better." Richard approached Thunder and immediately noticed the change in the animal's behavior. The horse was standing alert, his ears perked up, a dramatic shift from his depressed state in previous days. "Ethan, this is remarkable," Richard remarked, examining Thunder closely. "In just 2 days, you've made significant progress." "He's already eating feed and carrots and drinking water normally," Ethan reported proudly. "And today we took a walk outside." Richard checked the food and water bowls, confirming they were being used regularly. "How did you manage such a quick change?" Richard asked, genuinely curious. Ethan explained about the photos of Margaret, about singing the family song, about constantly talking to Thunder about positive memories. "You have a natural instinct with animals, Ethan," Richard praised. "Few adults could form such an emotional connection so quickly." "Dr. Richard, does this mean Thunder will make a full recovery?" Ethan asked hopefully. "Well, he's still recovering," Richard explained cautiously, "but the progress is very encouraging. If he keeps improving at this rate, he'll be back to normal in a week." Ethan was overjoyed by the vet's positive assessment. "What about the sale? Do you think Mrs. Barbara will agree to delay it?" Ethan asked. "Based on the progress I'm seeing, I'd strongly recommend postponing any transfer until he's fully recovered," Richard replied. "I'll speak with Mrs. Barbara about it." Richard spent a few more minutes examining Thunder, checking his reflexes, observing his movements, and assessing his overall condition. "Ethan, you're doing an excellent job," Richard concluded. "Keep doing exactly what you're doing. I'll come back at the end of the week for another evaluation." After Richard left, Ethan stayed alone with Thunder, feeling more confident than ever about the success of his mission. "Did you hear that, Thunder?" Ethan said to the horse. "Dr. Richard said you're getting better. Soon Mrs. Margaret will wake up and be so happy to see how strong and healthy you are." That night, Ethan told his parents about the vet's visit and the praise he'd received for caring for Thunder. "We're so proud of you, Ethan," Jennifer said, hugging her son. "You've shown such responsibility and dedication. But remember, you still have a week of testing ahead," Robert cautioned. "And then the challenge of getting the educational project up and running." "I know, Dad," Ethan replied, "but I'm confident. Today, Mrs. Sarah said she'll arrange meetings with other schools next week." During dinner, Ethan shared his plans for the next few days with Thunder, explaining how he intended to gradually increase the horse's food and exercise. "Ethan, we just want to make sure you're not forgetting other important things," Jennifer said. "Like your studies, your friends, your other responsibilities." "I'm not forgetting, Mom," Ethan assured her. "I finished all my homework yesterday and studied for tomorrow's math test." Robert and Jennifer seemed pleased with the balance Ethan was maintaining between his various responsibilities. The next morning, Friday, Ethan woke up with a sense of optimism he hadn't felt in a long time. Thunder was clearly improving, Mrs. Sarah was setting up meetings for the educational project, and Dr. Richard had praised his work. When he arrived at the horse farm, he was met with a surprise that made him incredibly happy. Thunder was eating feed on his own, without Ethan needing to encourage him with photos or conversation. "Thunder!" Ethan exclaimed. "You're eating by yourself, that's wonderful!" The horse lifted his head as Ethan approached, and for the first time in a week, Thunder let out a soft whinny, almost like a greeting. Ethan felt tears of joy in his eyes as he realized Thunder was truly recovering. The horse wasn't just eating, but also showing normal social behaviors. "Good morning to you too, Thunder," Ethan replied, offering carrots as usual. During his morning care routine, Ethan noticed Thunder was more active and curious about his surroundings. The horse watched Ethan as he cleaned the stable and even came closer when Ethan began humming Margaret's song. "Do you want me to sing more?" asked Ethan, noticing Thunder's interest. Ethan sang the entire song twice, observing how Thunder seemed to relax and calm down with the familiar melody. It was clear the music brought back positive memories for the animal. At school, Ethan took his math test with confidence, feeling he had prepared well despite all the extra responsibilities with Thunder. During recess, Mrs. Sarah approached him with news about the educational project. "Ethan, I have good news," Sarah announced excitedly. "I managed to schedule meetings with 3 schools for next week. 2 showed immediate interest in the project. Ethan was thrilled by the news. "Really, Mrs. Sarah? Do they want to bring students to the horse farm?" "They want to learn more about the proposal," Sarah explained. "One of the principals said she had been looking for exactly this kind of outdoor educational activity for the students." "When are the meetings?" Ethan asked eagerly. "1 on Monday and 2 on Tuesday," Sarah replied, "and they all agreed you should be part of the presentations." Ethan could hardly contain his excitement. Finally, the pieces of the plan were falling into place. "Mrs. Sarah, what do I need to do to prepare for the meetings?" "Well, you should organize a presentation about what the children would learn by visiting the horse farm," Sarah suggested, "and maybe prepare a practical demonstration with Thunder." Ethan spent the rest of the school day planning his presentation. He wanted to show the school principals exactly how an educational visit to the horse farm could be both interesting and instructive for the students. When he arrived at the horse farm that afternoon, he found another pleasant surprise. Thunder had eaten all the feed Ethan had left in the morning and was still munching on fresh hay. "Thunder, you're eating like a champ," Ethan praised. "Mrs. Margaret would be so proud to see how well you're taking care of yourself." Ethan decided it was time to try a more advanced exercise. He remembered that Margaret had taught Thunder some basic commands, like giving a hoof and lowering his head. "Let's see if you still remember the tricks Mrs. Margaret taught you," Ethan said, grabbing some carrots as a reward. Ethan stood in front of Thunder and held out his hand, saying, "Hoof," just as Margaret had demonstrated. To his delight, Thunder lifted his front hoof and placed it gently in Ethan's hand. "Good boy," Ethan praised, offering a carrot as a reward. "You remember everything." Ethan practiced a few more commands with Thunder, impressed by how easily the horse responded. It was clear that the months of training with Margaret had built a solid foundation of obedience and trust. "Thunder, next week we're going to show these tricks to other people," Ethan explained. "We'll help children learn about horses, just like Mrs. Margaret always wanted." Over the weekend, Ethan spent several hours organizing his presentation for the school meetings. He made a list of all the educational activities that could be done at the horse farm, from basic care to simple commands and safety around horses. He also spent extra time with Thunder, making sure the horse was completely comfortable around strangers and would respond properly to commands during demonstrations. On Sunday afternoon, Mrs. Sarah came to the horse farm to help Ethan prepare the presentation and check on Thunder in person. "Ethan, I can't believe the transformation," Sarah remarked, watching Thunder grazing peacefully in the small paddock beside the stable. "Just a week ago, he was depressed and refusing to eat." "It was a lot of work," Ethan admitted, "but it was worth it. Thunder is almost completely back to normal." Sarah watched Ethan interact with Thunder, noticing the special connection between the boy and the horse. "Ethan, you have a natural talent for this," Sarah remarked. "I'm sure the schools will be impressed with your knowledge and dedication." "Miss Sarah, do you think we'll be able to get enough groups to make the $1,000 a month that Mrs. Barbara needs?" Ethan asked. "Well, if we manage 2 visits a week, with groups of 15 children paying $5 each, that would be $300 a week," Sarah calculated. "In a month it would be $1,200. Ethan did the math in his head and grew excited at the possibility. "So it's possible!" he exclaimed. 15 kids per group isn't too many, and $5 isn't too expensive." "Let's see how the schools respond to the proposal," Sarah said cautiously. "But I'm optimistic." On Sunday night, Ethan could barely sleep from the anxiety about the meetings the next day. He had prepared as much as possible, but he still felt nervous about presenting his project to unfamiliar adults. On Monday morning, Ethan followed his usual routine with Thunder, making sure the horse was well fed and groomed for the afternoon demonstration. "Today is a very important day for us, Thunder," Ethan explained as he carefully brushed the horse. "We're going to meet people who might help us stay together." Thunder seemed to understand the importance of the moment, remaining calm and cooperative throughout all the preparations. At school, Ethan could hardly focus on his lessons, constantly thinking about the meeting scheduled for 2 in the afternoon. When the time came, Ethan met Miss Sarah at the horse farm. Accompanied by an elegant woman she introduced as Mrs. Elizabeth, the principal of Washington Elementary School. "Ethan, this is Mrs. Elizabeth," Sarah said. "She's interested in learning about your educational project." Ethan greeted the principal politely, trying to hide his nervousness. "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Elizabeth," he said. "Thank you for coming to see the horse farm." "Hello, Ethan," Elizabeth replied with a smile. "Miss Sarah told me some impressive things about your work with horses. I'm curious to see it." Ethan led the 2 teachers to the stable, where Thunder was waiting calmly. "This is Thunder," he introduced. "He was very sad because his owner got sick, but now he's recovering." Elizabeth watched closely as Ethan demonstrated his routine for caring for Thunder, explaining each step and its importance. "How did you learn all this, Ethan?" Elizabeth asked, impressed by the boy's knowledge. "Mrs. Margaret, who is Thunder's owner, taught me over several months," Ethan explained. "She always said kids could learn to care for horses if they had the right guidance." Ethan demonstrated some of the commands Thunder knew, explaining how each trick could be used to teach concepts about animal behavior and communication. "Mrs. Elizabeth," Ethan said respectfully, "if you bring students here, they could learn about responsibility, caring for animals, and how animals feel emotions just like humans." Elizabeth seemed genuinely interested in the proposal. "How many children could you accommodate per visit?" she asked. "I think 15 would be a good number," Ethan replied, remembering the calculations he had made with Sarah. "That way, everyone can participate in the activities." "And what would the cost be?" Elizabeth asked. $5 per child," Sarah answered. "That would cover the basic costs of maintaining the horse and the space." Elizabeth made a few notes in her planner. "Ethan, would you lead the activities alone?" she asked. "Miss Sarah would help me," Ethan explained. And Dr. Richard, who's a veterinarian, said he can come by a few times to teach about animal health. Elizabeth spent another 30 minutes asking detailed questions about safety, specific activities, and the logistics of the visits. Ethan answered every question confidently, showing he had carefully considered every aspect of the project. "Ethan, I'm very impressed," Elizabeth declared at the end of the meeting. "You've shown knowledge, responsibility, and passion for what you do. I'd like to bring a group of 5th graders next week for a trial visit." Ethan's heart raced with joy. "Really, Mrs. Elizabeth? You want to bring students here?" "I do," Elizabeth confirmed. "If the trial visit goes well, we can set up regular monthly visits." After Elizabeth left, Ethan hugged Mrs. Sarah, barely able to contain his excitement. "Mrs. Sarah, she liked it. She wants to bring students." "You gave an excellent presentation, Ethan," Sarah praised. "You showed impressive maturity and knowledge for a 10-year-old. "When did she say she wants to bring the trial group?" Ethan asked eagerly. "Next Friday," Sarah replied. "That gives us a week to prepare properly." Ethan spent the rest of the afternoon with Thunder, excitedly telling him about the successful meeting and the plans for the trial visit. "Did you hear that, Thunder?" Ethan said excitedly. "Next week, 15 kids are coming to meet you. You'll show them how smart and well-behaved you are." Thunder seemed to sense Ethan's joy, showing energy and excitement he hadn't displayed in 2 weeks. The next day, Tuesday, Ethan had 2 more meetings. The first was with the principal of Lincoln Middle School, who showed moderate interest in the proposal but asked for more time to decide. The second was with the principal of St. Mary Elementary School, who was extremely enthusiastic about the project. "Ethan," Principal Teresa said at the end of the meeting, "besides educational visits, have you thought about offering weekend activities for families?" Ethan hadn't considered that possibility. "How would that work, Mrs. Teresa?" "Well, many families look for interesting activities to do with their kids on weekends," Teresa explained. "You could offer family sessions where parents and children learn about horses together." Ethan was excited by the idea. Would that bring in more money to take care of Thunder? "Absolutely," Teresa confirmed. "Families can usually pay a bit more than schools, maybe $10 per person." Ethan did quick mental math. If he got just one family group per weekend with 10 people, that would be an extra $200 a month. "Mrs. Teresa, do you think families would be interested?" Ethan asked. "I'm sure of it," Teresa replied, "especially if you create activities tailored for different ages, from little kids to adults." After the meetings, Ethan was thrilled by the possibilities opening up. Not only had he gotten interest from multiple schools, but he'd also discovered an additional income source through family visits. When he told his parents about the day's developments, Robert and Jennifer were amazed by the success of the meetings. "Ethan, it seems like you've really created something special," Robert remarked. "We're proud of your dedication." "Dad, if everything works out, maybe we can keep Thunder forever," Ethan said hopefully, "at least until Mrs. Margaret recovers." "Son, these are still just promises," Jennifer gently cautioned. "We'll have to see if the visits actually happen and go well." Ethan understood his parents' caution, but he felt genuine confidence that the project would work. During the rest of the week, Ethan dedicated every free moment to preparing the horse farm for the experimental visit on Friday. He cleaned and organized the entire stable, prepared basic educational materials, and practiced all the commands and tricks Thunder would demonstrate for the children. Dr. Richard made a routine visit on Thursday and was impressed by Thunder's full recovery. "Ethan, this horse is in perfect condition," Richard declared after a thorough examination. "There's no sign of depression or behavioral issues." "Dr. Richard, does that mean Thunder is cured?" Ethan asked. "Completely cured," Richard confirmed. "In just 1 week you've achieved a full recovery. It's truly extraordinary." Ethan felt a wave of satisfaction and pride. He had kept his promise to help Thunder recover. "What about the sale?" Ethan asked. "Does Mrs. Barbara still want to sell him next week?" "Well, his health is no longer an obstacle," Richard explained, "but I heard you're developing a project that could generate income to keep the horse here." "That's right," Ethan confirmed excitedly. "Tomorrow is our first experimental visit and more schools are already interested." Richard smiled at Ethan's enthusiasm. "Ethan, "You've shown impressive dedication and skill," he praised. "No matter what happens with Thunder, you've proven you have a special talent for working with animals." On Friday morning, Ethan woke up 2 hours earlier than usual. It was the day of the experimental visit, and he wanted to make sure everything was perfect. He arrived at the horse farm before the sun was fully up and began meticulous preparations. He brushed Thunder until his coat shone, cleaned every inch of the stable, organized the educational materials, and checked all the safety equipment. "Today's our big day, Thunder," Ethan told the horse as he brushed him. "We're going to show everyone how special you are." Thunder seemed to understand the importance of the moment, staying calm and cooperative throughout the preparations. At 2 in the afternoon, Mrs. Sarah arrived with teacher Elizabeth and 15 excited 5th grade students. Ethan felt butterflies in his stomach as he saw the group, but he took a deep breath and prepared to lead his first official educational visit. "Good afternoon, everyone," Ethan greeted them clearly. "Welcome to Mrs. Margaret's horse farm. I'm Ethan, and this is Thunder." The children approached curiously, asking questions about the horse and showing genuine interest in the activities. Ethan began by explaining basic safety rules around horses, then demonstrated how Thunder responded to simple commands. The children were delighted when the horse lifted his hoof and lowered his head on command. "Who wants to try feeding Thunder a carrot?" Ethan asked. All the children eagerly raised their hands. Ethan organized a line and taught each child how to safely offer a carrot, explaining Thunder's personality and preferences. "Thunder loves carrots, but he also likes apples and neck scratches," Ethan explained as he supervised the interactions. During the 2-hour visit, Ethan led several activities: demonstrations of basic care, explanations about horse behavior, a Q&A session, and even a short walk with Thunder around the property. The children asked dozens of questions, from "Why is the horse this color?" to "How do they sleep?" Ethan answered each one with patience and knowledge, impressing not just the students but also the teachers. "Ethan," said a girl named Emma, "did you always want to work with horses?" "Actually, I met Thunder just a few months ago," explained Ethan. "Mrs. Margaret taught me everything about horses, and I discovered I really enjoy taking care of them." "And Mrs. Margaret, where is she?" asked another boy. Ethan felt a pang in his heart but answered honestly, "Mrs. Margaret is sick at the hospital," he explained. "Thunder was very sad when she left, so I'm taking care of him until she comes back." The children were visibly moved by the story, and several showed extra affection for Thunder after learning about the situation. At the end of the visit, the teacher Elizabeth pulled Ethan aside for a private conversation. "Ethan, that was one of the best educational activities I've ever seen," Elizabeth praised sincerely. The children learned, had fun, and were genuinely touched by the story. Ethan felt his heart swell with joy and pride. "Miss Elizabeth, does that mean you want to bring more groups?" he asked hopefully. "I want to set up regular monthly visits," Elizabeth confirmed, "and I'll recommend you to other schools in the area." Ethan could barely contain his excitement. The project had been a complete success. "Miss Elizabeth, thank you so much for giving me and Thunder this opportunity," Ethan said earnestly. "Ethan, you deserve all the success," Elizabeth replied. "You've shown maturity, knowledge, and admirable dedication." After the group left, Ethan was alone with Mrs. Sarah and Thunder, processing the afternoon's success. "Mrs. Sarah, it worked," Ethan exclaimed. "The kids loved it, and Miss Elizabeth wants regular visits." "You did a brilliant job, Ethan," Sarah praised. "You led the activity like an experienced educator." "And now? What happens now?" Ethan asked. "Now we need to talk to Mrs. Barbara about the results," Sarah replied, "to show her the project has real potential to generate the income needed to keep Thunder." Ethan spent the weekend anxious about the conversation with Barbara. He had met both conditions she had set. Thunder was fully recovered and eating normally, and the educational project had shown real potential for success. On Monday afternoon, Barbara came to the horse farm, accompanied by Dr. Richard, for a final evaluation. "Mrs. Barbara," Ethan greeted respectfully, "thank you for coming to see the results." Barbara examined Thunder, immediately noticing the complete transformation in the animal's behavior and appearance. "Truly, the horse seems to be in perfect condition," Barbara admitted. "Dr. Richard, what's your professional assessment?" "The animal is fully recovered," Richard confirmed. "There are no health or behavioral issues preventing a potential transfer." Ethan felt a chill in his stomach at the word transfer. "Mrs. Barbara," Ethan said quickly, "can I show you the results of the trial visit?" Ethan explained in detail about Friday's visit, the school's interest in regular visits and the possibility of weekend family activities. "And what would the estimated monthly revenue be?" Barbara asked with practical interest. "With 2 school visits a week and 1 family activity on weekends, we could make about $1,400 a month," Ethan calculated. "That's more than the $1,000 needed to keep Thunder." Barbara seemed genuinely surprised by the numbers. "Ethan, did you really manage to organize all this in a week?" she asked. "Mrs. Sarah and I work together," Ethan explained, "and people in the community are very interested in supporting the project." Barbara fell silent for a few minutes, clearly considering all the information. "Ethan," she said finally, "you've met the conditions I set. The horse is healthy, and you've shown that the project can generate enough income." Ethan held his breath, waiting for the final decision. "I'm willing to delay the sale for 3 months to see if this project really works long-term," Barbara announced. Ethan shouted with joy and ran to hug Thunder. "Did you hear that, Thunder? We have 3 months we get to stay together. But with conditions," Barbara added firmly. "If in 3 months the project isn't consistently making at least $1,000 a month, I sell the horse immediately. And you, Ethan, must keep up with your school and family responsibilities." "I promise, Mrs. Barbara," Ethan assured her. "I'll prove we can make this work." After Barbara left, Ethan spent the rest of the afternoon with Thunder, celebrating the temporary but meaningful victory. "Thunder, now we have time to make everything right," Ethan told the horse. "We'll work hard to show we deserve to stay together." Over the next 3 weeks, Ethan threw himself into developing the educational project. He partnered with 4 different schools, organized regular visits, and began offering weekend family activities. The success surpassed even his most optimistic expectations. The children loved the visits, parents praised the educational quality of the activities, and even adults started seeking Ethan out to learn about horse care. Mrs. Sarah helped Ethan create an organized scheduling system and develop age-specific activities. Dr. Richard became a regular collaborator, giving talks on animal health during some visits. By the end of the first month, Ethan had earned $1,600, exceeding Barbara's target. More importantly, he had built a solid reputation in the community as a dedicated and knowledgeable young educator. "Ethan," Mrs. Sarah said during one activity, "you've turned a difficult situation into something truly special. This project isn't just helping Thunder, it's benefiting the whole community." Ethan felt proud of his achievements, but knew he still had 2 testing months ahead. He couldn't relax or assume early success guaranteed long-term results. The second month brought challenges. Some school visits were cancelled due to rainy weather, and one week no families signed up for weekend activities. Ethan had to learn to handle the frustration of inconsistent income and the constant pressure to keep the project profitable. There were moments he felt overwhelmed by the responsibility of supporting Thunder financially while keeping up with school. "Dad," Ethan said one night after a particularly hard day, "sometimes I wonder if I can really keep all this going." "Ethan," Robert replied gently, "what you've accomplished so far is extraordinary. But remember, there's no shame in admitting when something is beyond your capacity." "I know, Dad," Ethan sighed. "But Thunder is counting on me. Mrs. Margaret trusted me. I can't give up now." Jennifer hugged her son. "Ethan, no one expects you to solve grown-up problems alone," she said tenderly. "If you need help, if things get too hard, we're here." His parents' support gave Ethan the emotional strength to keep facing the project's challenges. By the end of the second month, despite ups and downs, he had maintained a monthly average of $1,300. It was slightly above the minimum goal, but Ethan knew he needed to improve consistency to convince Barbara to let Thunder stay permanently. During the third and final month of the trial, Ethan implemented several improvements to the project. He created an advanced booking system to ensure more predictable revenue, developed special activities for holidays, and established partnerships with other local businesses to attract more families. The extra effort paid off. Ethan managed to schedule enough visits to ensure the third month brought in $1,800, the best result yet. More important than the financial numbers, Ethan had created something that genuinely benefited the community. Children in the area had developed love and respect for animals through the activities at the horse farm. Families had found an educational and fun activity to do together, and Ethan himself had discovered a passion that could influence his future career choices. On the last day of the trial period, Barbara came to the horse farm for a final evaluation. Ethan presented all the numbers, satisfaction testimonials from schools and families, and plans to expand the project in the future. "Ethan," Barbara said after reviewing all the documentation, "I'm genuinely impressed with what you've managed to create here." Ethan held his breath, waiting for the final decision. "You not only managed to generate the necessary revenue, but created something with real value for the community," Barbara continued. "I'm willing to formalize a long-term agreement." Ethan felt tears of joy in his eyes. "Mrs. Barbara, does this mean Thunder can stay?" "It means that as long as you keep the project running and generating adequate revenue, Thunder stays," Barbara confirmed. "And when my sister recovers, if she recovers, the two of you can decide the future together." Ethan ran to hug Thunder, barely containing his emotion. "Did you hear that, Thunder? We did it! We get to stay together," he exclaimed. Thunder neighed in response, as if understanding Ethan's joy and sharing his happiness. That night, Ethan called the hospital to check on Margaret's condition. To his surprise, he received news that she had shown signs of improvement in recent days, and that the doctors were optimistic about her chances of recovery. "Thunder," Ethan said the next day, showing a new photo he had taken of the horse, "Mrs. Margaret is getting better. Soon she'll be able to see how strong and handsome you've become and how we've created something special here." 2 months later, Margaret woke from her coma. She still had a long recovery ahead, but she was conscious and could receive visitors. Ethan was one of the first to visit her at the hospital, bringing a photo album documenting everything that had happened in her absence. "Ethan," Margaret said in a weak but emotional voice, "my sister told me everything you did for Thunder, for me, for this property." "Mrs. Margaret, I only did what you taught me," Ethan replied modestly. "To take care of those we love." Margaret cried as she saw the photos of Thunder, healthy and happy, of children learning about horses, of family activities at the horse farm. "You've turned my dream into reality," Margaret said. "I always wanted this place to be a space of learning and joy for children. And when you're better, we'll work together to make the project grow even more," Ethan promised. 3 months later, Margaret was discharged from the hospital. She still needed physical therapy and regular medical care, but she was determined to gradually return to her normal life. The first thing she did upon arriving home was visit Thunder in the stable Ethan had kept impeccable all those months. Thunder recognized Margaret immediately, showing intense joy upon reuniting with his beloved owner. But what moved Margaret the most was realizing that the horse had also maintained his special affection for Ethan, displaying equal enthusiasm when the boy approached. "Ethan," said Margaret, watching the natural interaction between the boy and the horse, "you didn't just save Thunder. You created a family." Ethan smiled, feeling he had finally found his place in the world. "Mrs. Wilson, can I keep helping you take care of Thunder and the educational project?" he asked. "Ethan," Margaret replied with a smile, "I couldn't do this without you. We're partners now." In the following months, Ethan and Margaret worked together to expand the educational project. They created programs for different ages, formed partnerships with more schools in the area, and even began offering basic horseback riding lessons for children. The horse farm became a cornerstone of the community, known for the quality of its educational activities and the special care shown to the animals. Ethan, now 11, had developed a maturity and sense of responsibility that impressed every adult who knew him. He maintained excellent grades in school, helped at home, and still found time to dedicate himself wholeheartedly to the project at the horse farm. "Ethan," said Mrs. Sarah during one of the school visits, "you've become an example of how a child can make a difference in the world with determination and the right support." "Mrs. Sarah, I just did what anyone who loves horses would do," Ethan replied modestly. But everyone who knew Ethan understood he had done much more than that. He had shown the courage to face a seemingly impossible situation, the creativity to find innovative solutions, and the perseverance to overcome every obstacle in his path. Thunder, now fully recovered and happy, became the perfect ambassador for the educational project. His gentle and responsive nature made him the ideal horse to teach children about respect and animal care. The horse seemed to understand his special role, showing extra patience with nervous visitors and proudly performing his tricks whenever Ethan asked. "Thunder," Ethan said during one of his daily conversations with the horse, "you helped save yourself. When you decided to trust me and start eating again, everything began to fall into place." During the first full year of the project, Ethan and Margaret welcomed over 500 children for educational visits, organized dozens of family activities, and generated enough revenue not only to support Thunder, but also to make improvements to the horse farm's infrastructure. The story of Ethan and Thunder spread throughout the region, inspiring other young people to take an interest in animal welfare and outdoor educational activities. A local journalist wrote an article about the project, highlighting how a 10-year-old boy had turned a crisis into an opportunity for growth and learning for the entire community. "Ethan," Margaret said after reading the article, "you've taught me that age is no barrier to doing extraordinary things. You've shown me that determination and love can overcome any obstacle." Ethan, now 12, and recognized as one of the most respected young people in the community, continued working daily with Thunder and expanding the educational project. He had created a horse care manual specifically for children, established a volunteer program for teens interested in working with animals, and even begun giving talks in other towns about his work. But for Ethan, the greatest achievement wasn't the recognition or the project's success. It was the certainty that he had kept his promise to Thunder and to Margaret, proving that love, dedication, and perseverance can overcome any challenge. "Thunder," said Ethan during the second anniversary of their first visit to the horse farm, "when I met you, I was running away from my problems at home. But you taught me that instead of running from problems, we can face them and turn them into something better." The horse, now 7 years old, and at the peak of his physical and emotional health, whinnied softly in response, as if agreeing with the words of his young friend and partner. The story of Ethan and Thunder became an example in the community of how crises can turn into opportunities when faced with creativity, determination, and the support of people who believe in each individual's potential, regardless of age. Margaret Wilson's horse farm continued to operate successfully, teaching hundreds of children about responsibility, empathy, and animal care. Ethan grew into a teenager, admired for his maturity and dedication, always remembering that his extraordinary journey began with a simple act of love, deciding not to abandon a horse in need. And Thunder, the horse who had refused food and water after losing his owner, became a symbol of hope and recovery, proving that with proper care and plenty of love, it's possible to overcome even the most painful losses and find joy in life again. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of Ethan and Thunder's story. Where are you watching from? If you have any experiences with animals to share, leave us a heartfelt comment. Do you think Ethan made the right decisions? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss other touching stories like this one.